Recent clashes between tribes in Sudan's West Darfur region have left dozens of people dead, while thousands have fled to neighboring Chad. Now, the killings are taking place after a joint peace mission to the region by the UN and the African Union ended in January. Many internally displaced persons had expressed fear that the government will not protect them after the withdrawal of international peacekeepers.
We, as the IDPs, we are victims of the wars because we all become orphans. Our government is the one who is fighting against us.
Hello and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Africa Today. We are focusing on the endless conflict in Sudan's Darfur region. We are asking, what is the root cause of this conflict? And are foreign powers involved in the suffering of the people in Darfur? In the second part of our program, we are going to talk about how West African nations are losing hundreds of millions of dollars to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing.
Endless conflict in Sudan's Darfur. Sudan's West Darfur state has seen an upsurge in violence, with members of the Masalit and Arab communities clashing early April in the state capital, El Geneina. The Masalit are mainly farmers, while the Arab tribes are mainly herders, with the violence and divisions rooted in disputes over land, pasture, and water resources. To prevent the situation from spiraling out of control, Sudan's government has declared a state of emergency in the region. The vast Darfur region was ravaged by a civil war that erupted in 2003, leaving some 300,000 people dead and 2.5 million displaced. A Sudanese refugee speaks here on life at a camp for internally displaced people.
تم لي يومين يجيب لي حطب عشان بين اكل العيال ده لكن خايف اليوم لان هسه بيتدا حطب ساي ما قاعد نرسل بير بعيد ما قاعد نرسل هاي خايف اليوم والله لان امان بقى معي.
The latest clashes come after the United Nations Security Council voted unanimously last December to end the joint African Union-UN peacekeeping force in Darfur.
Following the overthrow of President Omar al-Bashir in April 2019, Sudan has been experiencing turbulent and fragile transition, especially in Darfur. In August of 2019, civilian political groups and military commanders reached a power-sharing agreement charting the path for Sudan's transition. A peace deal was signed in October 2020 with a number of rebel factions, but some key armed groups are still active in Darfur. Now, to analyze the ongoing conflict in Sudan's Darfur region, we contacted Edward Corrigan, an international lawyer and journalist based in Canada. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Corrigan. Now, what is the reason behind the recent flare-up of conflict in Sudan's Darfur region?
In my opinion, it's complex. It actually goes back to the 1884 Berlin Conference, where the European colonial powers divided up Africa in a way that deliberately disrespected the sort of cultural, ethnic, and tribal boundaries. So you end up with all the states basically having a very, weak state identity and tribal boundaries, which the tribe just ignores. The other problem is, since 2003, when the conflict erupted, it was exacerbated by conditions of drought, which greatly affected both the groups that have farmland and also the groups that are nomadic and have to move their herds and camels and stuff like that through the areas. There's also the suspicion that there's oil in Darfur, which means that some external actors are interested in destabilizing Sudan and perhaps getting access or control over these oil resources, which are hoped to be there.
Thanks for that insight, Mr. Corrigan, and stay tuned for more.
The peace deal last year between some armed groups and Sudan's transitional government was touted as a historic moment, coming following the overthrow of long-serving ruler Omar al-Bashir. As part of the deal, Sudan's Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok appointed a veteran Darfur rebel group leader as finance minister in a cabinet overhaul amid a worsening economic crisis. Addressing the nation after the February cabinet reshuffle, Hamdok said the new cabinet came as a result of a political consensus.
هذا التشكيل قام على توافق سياسي.
This formation came after a political agreement that happened after long discussions, which took months.
والبوصلة الأساسية فيها كانت
Its primary purpose was to save this country from collapse.
البلد من الانهيار. نحن لو طلعنا
As you can see, our region has many problems and challenges.
تحديات كثيرة جدا.
Countries close and far from us have collapsed in the past years.
انهارت في السنوات الفاتت.
We, as Sudanese people, will not repeat this example.
ما حأمل تكرار هذه المسألة.
Some of the conflict-affected communities also complained that their voices have not been heard, and they expressed their reservations about the deal.
We've been in these camps since 2004. We want the conflict to end so we can go back to our harvest and to our ancestral home. But we've not been properly consulted on the deal that's taking place or represented, and so we're concerned it may not hold.
Now, Mr. Corrigan, the people in Darfur appear skeptical about the peace agreement signed last October. Now, what could be the factor behind this skepticism?
They're skeptical because there's no peace. So you still have ongoing violence, attacks by the various groups against each other. And you have militia going around attacking and raping people. And so you have a very, again, weak government in Darfur, and they don't have the ability to impose order themselves. And the central government in Sudan doesn't have the ability to put, put peacekeeping efforts and force to provide security for Darfur. So the situation is reverting to what it was before the peace agreement in October 2020.
Well, thanks for that insight, Mr. Corrigan.
The African Union United Nations hybrid operation in Darfur, referred to by its acronym UNAMID, was established on 31st of July 2007 with the adoption of a UN Security Council resolution. On December 31st last year, UNAMID formally ended its operations in the region. People in Darfur protested the departure of the UN peacekeepers at the time, citing fears of renewed violence. Let's take a listen.
We, as the IDPs, we are victims of the wars because we all become orphans. Our government is the one who is fighting against us. Before UNAMID, or I will say in the presence of UNAMID, attacked us in the camp more than 3 times. So that is why we see, if in the presence of UNAMID, the government of Sudan and the militia, I would say Janjaweed, are attacking us.
Now, has the withdrawal of UN and African Union peacekeeping troops contributed to the upsurge of violence, and should these troops be reinstated?
Yes, the withdrawal of the troops who served as a peacekeeping force and also as a buffer between the various competing tribal groups and political groups have withdrawn. So this has created a problem. And yes, I think as a transition, it's probably a good idea to have UN forces, and in particular the African Union forces, coming in a genuine effort to bring security for the region, separate the boundaries, and to help build some civil and political institutions that can restore order and maintain peace.
Now, many people in Darfur are in dire need of assistance, but funding for relief efforts has dwindled. Thousands of displaced people are living in overcrowded makeshift camps. What's the humanitarian situation in Darfur now?
Well, in Darfur, it's a disaster. There's a drought, there's a huge shortage of water, a shortage of food, and some people describe it as the worst humanitarian catastrophe on the planet. Yemen is also described as the worst humanitarian disaster in the planet. So, to say that Yemen and Darfur are competing is not a very good thing, because both are terrible. But there is a lack of resources. The UN, the Western powers are not putting the food and money needed into sort of, help protect people. and they need to invest in building political and civil infrastructure that can look after the people's interests, and that's not happening. So yes, the situation in Darfur is a disaster, and it's only going to get worse, and it's an ongoing part of the shifting climate in the area and the expansion of the deserts and drought. So this is all part of climate change that is having a devastating impact on the people of Darfur and also people in other parts of Africa.
Well, thanks, Mr. Corrigan. Well, it's quite interesting there to note that climate change is also a source of conflict in Darfur and indeed other parts of Africa. Now, before we wind up, Mr. Corrigan, is the transitional authority in Khartoum able to restore peace in Darfur?
They are trying to get involved in Darfur, but again, they're relying upon the old tribal alliances, and that is not going to solve the problem, but probably in the short term exacerbate them. And what you need is sort of a more unified civil identity that will bring the various groups in Darfur and Sudan together in a way that is acceptable. As I said, because of the division of Africa by the European powers in 1884 in the Berlin Conference, every African state, quite frankly, is unstable. As a result, you've got, weak states with a very fluid sort of, social and cultural and political environment that moves. So, every African state basically has political problems which they've inherited from the colonial period and haven't been able to overcome them.
Mr. Corrigan there says that most of the conflicts in Africa are the result of boundaries imposed by colonial powers. Now, let us know what you think about that perspective through our social media handle. Now, we're going to take a short break, and in the next part of this week's edition of Africa Today, we shall look at how Europe's fishing fleets are wreaking havoc in West Africa. Don't go away.
How Europe's dark fishing fleets threaten West Africa.
Cargo ships from around the world are moving untracked in African waters, where the rise of illegal and unregulated fishing activity affects everything from local biodiversity to piracy.
According to a report by ENT website, West Africa is a hotspot for what is known in the industry as illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization says West African nations lose $2.3 billion each year to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. The 5,500 kilometers coastline of West Africa is home to some of the most diverse fisheries in the world. Local fishermen are worried that if this trend of illegal and unregulated fishing continues, there will be no more fish left for future generations.
For more on this subject, we contacted Dr. Efesinachi Okefuriarwood, a lecturer in sustainable development at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Thanks a lot for your time, Dr. Okefuriarwood. Now, to start off, first tell us, how serious is this problem of illegal fishing in West African waters by European fishing companies?
Thank you so much for the question. Illegal fishing by foreign vessels is a very big problem. And just to give you a bit of a statistics to get a general idea of how big the problem is, it amounts to the equivalent of 40 to 65% of illegally reported catch in West Africa alone. And then going beyond the illegal fishing, there's also a problem of legal fishing itself, which obviously is sort of exacerbating the extent to which fisheries resources is depleting. And by legal fishing, I mean the continued targeting of species that are already overexploited. So all these things are some of the issues that contribute to depletion of fish stock. And I wouldn't necessarily want to say that it is only European vessels, because unfortunately, Asian vessels are also complicit.
Now, citizens of countries affected by illegal and unregulated fishing blame their governments for failing to invest in sustainable fisheries as a way to build resilience and improve the livelihoods of coastal communities.
It's down to human greed. We local fishermen are partly to blame, but it's also our government's fault allocating fishing rights to foreign industrial vessels. They act like pirates, pillaging our ocean's resources. This needs to stop.
The populations of West Africa, home to one of the world's most resource-rich marine environments, is suffering widespread poverty and a scarcity of legitimate livelihoods in part due to high levels of foreign illegal fishing and overfishing. A Senegalese fish seller here says lack of fish is affecting her livelihood.
dañuy toog rek duñu mën a ñëw port sax mën a lijjanti loo xam ne tey mën nañ ko dundee wala mën nañ ko faje seen soxla.
How has the illegal and unregulated fishing by foreign fishing companies contributed to the rising levels of poverty and unemployment in the region?
The implication of illegal fishing is absolutely devastating for countries in West Africa and their people. Just to give you a bit of statistics. Each year, just for 6 West African countries, Mauritania, Senegal, the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, they lose an estimated $2.3 billion to illegal fishing each year. And obviously, the amount that they lose is likely to be more due to the clandestine nature of this crime means that it is practically impossible to put an amount to it. And so this is the loss to the nations. Imagine, therefore, the impact it has on the people that actually depend on this resource for subsistence. Their food security is undermined. Their income security is also undermined.
Illegal and unregulated fishing also harms the marine environment and leads to depletion of fish supply. Some fishing methods, such as dredging and bottom trawling, also impact the seafloor habitat. What's the extent of environmental impact on illegal fishing?
The environmental impact of illegal fishing is very devastating for countries in West Africa, especially when you take into account the impact of climate change and the impact of pollution in the region already. And so it means that the fact that vessels engaging in illegal fishing are actually able to discard species that they catch, by discard I mean throw it back in the ocean, this leads to pollution because it creates or it results in oxygen dead zones. These are zones that are oxygen deprived, which means that marine life cannot thrive in those areas. And so illegal fishing is absolutely a problem due to the pollution in terms of this oxygen dead zone that I've talked about, but also the fact that vessels engaging in illegal fishing sometimes discard their nets to avoid detection. It obviously undermines the sustainability of the ocean environment in those ways through pollution.
The European Union has fishing agreements with individual African nations for legal fishing rights. However, even where the EU pays a set amount annually to the host country for fishing rights, the amount paid is peanuts compared to the value of the fish.
Now, these agreements are questionable because they promote the export of African marine resources into the EU to the detriment of local economies and food security. European governments are clearly aware of companies in their countries that are engaged in unsustainable fishing to satisfy Europe's appetite for fish. Now, why have they failed to take action to stop these acts of impunity?
It's really baffling because the reality is that, in recent time, there's this global conversation around putting an end to harmful subsidy, because this is a subsidy that allows or enables distant water fishing vessels to go to third countries or countries like those in West Africa to exploit species, either targeting already overexploited species legally or engaging in illegal fishing. I'm not stopping or putting an end to these subsidies, which obviously mean that for them, it's more or less about their own respective national interest than ensuring the sustainability of the marine resources or even the livelihood of the countries where these illegal acts are affected.
Very unfortunate indeed that greed by rich industrialized countries is leading to increased levels of poverty in these West African countries. As we have seen there, illegal and unregulated fishing in West Africa is a major challenge in the region, threatening livelihoods, nutritional security, export revenues, and destroying the environment.
Addressing the 10th Conference of Ministers and the 10th anniversary of the Fisheries Committee for the West Central Gulf of Guinea in 2017, Nigerian Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo outlined some of his government's plans aimed at stopping illegal and unregulated fishing.
To this end, President Buhari has approved the purchase of some vessels for the Department of Fisheries, some patrol vessels for the Department of Fisheries, which will be managed in collaboration with the Nigerian Navy. These vessels will boost the search and rescue capacities of the relevant security agencies, deter illegal fishing, prevent illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and help secure our vessels at sea.
Now, our last question, Dr. Okafor-Yarud. What needs to be done to safeguard the West African waters?
What needs to be done is for African countries to actually work together. Something that an example of how countries or regions can collaborate or cooperate around fisheries agreement, for instance, should they decide to go that route, is something that Pacific island nations have, where they negotiate these agreements as a bloc. In the context of West Africa, we already have the Economic Community of West African States. So perhaps they can come together as a bloc as well and negotiate fisheries agreement in a way that if they decide to continue with this approach as a way of economic development, they are then better able to ensure that they negotiate better deal as a bloc, and also ensure that the interest of the communities where the species are extracted from is protected. And by this, I also mean that there is need for better transparency around this agreement.
Well, Dr. Okafor-Yarud there says that unity of African countries and transparency is key to stopping illegal and unregulated fishing that is impacting negatively on communities. Now, what's your opinion? Let's know what you think through our social media handle. Well, our time is up for today. Thanks a lot for watching, and on behalf of my colleagues here at Africa Today, it's goodbye for now.